Would you believe me if I tell you 60% of women with internet access have personally experienced some form of technologically facilitated violence? That's 60%, roughly 3 in 5 women online. And this report is from 2023. The world has expanded since, and of course, the numbers have gotten worse. I'll get into all of those details later. But first, let's understand what is technologically facilitated, gender based or just violence. Welcome to the Bol Breakdown, a series where I break down the research on tech facilitated violence into something you can use to understand, to act, and hopefully, to speak up. Hi again. This is the first episode of Bol Breakdown, and in this episode, I will explain 3 things. 1. What drove the world to define TFGBV? Second, what is the definition of TFGBV? And third, what are its key characteristics? Also, yes, I will keep calling technologically facilitated gender-based violence as TFGBV for obvious reasons. Technologically facilitated violence, a word I have now repeated thrice in a 3-minute video, had no one definition for the longest time. Multiple names were given to this one phenomena, but there was no one word for it. Until 2021, when United Nations Population Fund, UNFPA, came up with a report making all spaces safe. And with that report, they adopted and popularized technologically facilitated gender-based violence, a term that was going to formally give a name to digital violence, cyberbullying, online harassment. We will spend the rest of this episode decoding this one phenomena. But first, a short history lesson. We have been living in a dizzying state of technological change in the last 3 decades. In the 1970s, Alan Toffler, a famous American author, came up with a book called Future Shock. The book essentially warned us against the exponential rate at which technological advancements were taking place. He pointed out that something which would take half a century to be rolled out in the Industrial Revolution was happening in like a decade. For example, the practical typewriter took half a century, more than half a century to be rolled out. The first prototype was built in late 1700s and it hit the market in late 1870s or early 1880s. So essentially more than half a century. Toffler shows that, in contrast, the second generation of computers has shown up before the first one were obsolete. It was less than a decade. Alan Toffler defined future shock as the dizzying disorientation brought on by the premature arrival of the future. What we need to understand in all of this is that this was written in 1970s. That was way before all of internet happened. These advancements have gone into an overdrive in the last 3 decades. And the one technology that has completely changed is the information and communication technology. When Toffler wrote the book, we were communicating by post or via landline telephones. And in 20 years, we had mobile phones. Personal computers became a thing. And with personal computers came internet in each home. We were now connected through this weird platform that allowed us to talk to complete strangers living at the other end of the world anonymously. So what happened next was that we took this idea and ran with it. Social media platforms came in. Every year there was a new social media platform. Can you believe it? Facebook came in 2004, YouTube 2005, Twitter 2006. Each new platform changed how we interacted. We now had profiles, which is a depiction of us online. We had online personas, and we were going public without leaving our home. And one of the most significant outcomes of the insane level of advancements was that the line between the online and the offline world just merged. We started doing in-person activities online and started meeting our online friends in person. We were using the web to research, to play, and it seems to harass. The history of tech-facilitated gender-based violence is as old as technology. One of the earliest cases of cyber rape was recorded in 1993. Did we even know internet back then? But there was a multi-user platform, which is basically a virtual hangout space where people used to chat using avatars. And this one handle called Mr. Bungle used a subprogram to control other people's avatars and force them into simulated sexual acts. This was when only 4% of the world was online. Today, 73% is. So, the instances of online violence have adapted and increased. And not to put you down with numbers, and well, sadly, I don't even have a lot of numbers because it took forever for us to even acknowledge that this was a problem. We have our first reports on this from 2010s. In 2014, 15% of Americans reported experiencing severe online harassment. By 2020, which is 6 years later, the number had doubled. And you know what is the other thing that happened in 2020? COVID. COVID happened and the world moved online, lock, stock, and barrel. It took a pandemic and years of activism by multiple groups for people to finally come to terms that maybe there is a problem. So in 2021, UNFPA, which is United Nations Population Fund, came up with a report called Technologically Facilitated Gender-Based Violence, Making All Spaces Safe. And they built a program around it. Yes, this is the report I spoke about. So let's go to our next section. What is technologically facilitated gender-based violence? As per the report that I just mentioned, UNFPA defines technologically facilitated gender-based violence, and let me read this out, as an act of violence perpetrated by one or more individuals that is committed, assisted, aggravated, and amplified in part or fully by the use of information and communication technology or digital media against a person on the basis of the gender. You got that, right? Like, I don't need to repeat it. Okay, no, I will break it down. This is a very complicated term, but there is a reason for it. They wanted to create a definition which was broad enough to be inclusive of more things, but also specific enough to allow for operationalization. So let's go word by word. First, it's an act of violence. And well, duh. Second, it's perpetrated by one or more individuals. We have to understand that tech-facilitated gender-based violence, or any of the tech-facilitated violence, have this weird feature where they can be done en masse, anonymously, from anywhere. And so it's not necessarily one person doing it to another. It can be multiple individuals. So perpetrated by one or more individuals. Committed, assisted, aggravated, and amplified. They're calling each of these things as being part of this crime. So you don't necessarily have to be someone who has posted the online content or someone who has called someone a slur online. If you like the post, if you reposted, you are aggravating it and you're amplifying it. Both of those are considered an act of violence. In part or fully. This is another thing that I find very useful in this definition, which is that not looking at a violence as just doing the entire act, but even if you did a part of it, even if you did not necessarily repost it, but the fact that you uploaded it, you are committing an act of violence. This would be equivalent to you creating a website which then helps others to create abusive content. Just FYI. Anyways, the next bit is the more wordy bit, which is by the use of information communication technologies or digital media. And the reason they kept it this vague and this broad is because they wanted to make it time invariant. We need to be sure that we are keeping up with pace, and you can't have a new definition every year. So they were like, all of the ICT and digital media, any advancement in that space would be included in this. And the final bit is against a person on the basis of their gender. The idea is that the entire space of tech-facilitated violence in of itself is a justifiable space to study. But a large part of the violence that we are specifically looking at here, and that is most visible, is the one that is rooted in gender inequality. A large part of, and I will explain this later on, the victims of tech-facilitated violence are women, or people from minorities, or people from LGBTQ plus community. In certain work, people have even claimed that it is an attempt to bring back the old patriarchal power structures. Again, this does not mean that the violence is not faced by men. A large part of sexual extortions are faced by men. They are largely the bigger victims. So, what were the features of this definition? I think this definition worked in multiple ways because it was inclusive of all circumstances and forms of violence that would take place. But primarily, what it does is that it brings back the idea that online and offline is a continuum. What does that mean? When they use the word tech facilitated and not just online violence, what they mean is that this violence is not something separate from the violence that's happening offline. It is technology facilitating the offline violence. And therefore, they did not go for any of the digital violence or cyberbullying or online harassment as the word. They went for technologically facilitating the gender based violence. I think that's very important. Having a definition was also an important step in formalizing this topic. Like I mentioned, there was very little comparable data or any data on this before 2014. One of the reasons for that was that there was no one term. People were doing some sort of research on it, although albeit very little. There was some body of research, but the problem was that they were examining and measuring some specific form of TFGBV. But because there was not a clear definition, this entire phenomena was not captured into one clear idea. And therefore, the data was both scarce but also non comparable. And one of the examples that the report gives is of this research done by The Economist, which essentially studied 4,500 people across 51 countries and looked at the prevalence of online violence. Their findings, let me just quickly get into it because it was insane. The finding was that 38% of women online have personally experienced harassment and 85% have known someone or seen someone go through an online harassment, which is insane numbers. But what the report really uses this example is to show that it only captured online violence. That is then violence that's occurring on internet and through that mode. It does not capture the violence occurring through mobile phones, GPS, and other technologies. So what the definition really did is that it gave us a clearest and the most comparable form of the information that could be used to make policy and, have this conversation we are having today. The report also gets into those who are the most affected by TFGBV. And sadly, the most affected by this are adolescent girls. All of this is horrendous to hear. Again, another trigger warning. I would suggest skipping through to the next section if this is difficult. But it seems that 80% of the cases that come across for child abuse material are of girls aged between 11 to 13 years, which is a disturbing fact. This was a study done by Internet Watch Foundation, which essentially created a platform for people to be able to report abusive content. And then they looked at the web pages every 2 minutes. Every 3 minutes of that, the web pages showed a child being sexually abused. So one of the most gruesome fact of tech-facilitated gender-based violence is that it specifically targets adolescent girls. The next biggest group that is affected by this sort of violence are the women in public and professional life. We have seen multiple cases of deepfakes being created of K-pop celebrities. There are many examples of women facing online harassment primarily because of their celebrity status. One of the reasons given is that it is part of their job. The report also does this brilliant thing about highlighting numbers to this. UNESCO did a study of 901 journalists across 125 countries, and they found that 73% of them faced online violence. This is also very integral to the experience of being a female politician. All the politicians across the globe have faced some form of abuse or threat. Most of them are in form of death, rape, beating, abduction. It is a case of a group of people, a mass abuse that occurs purely because of their identity or their ideological differences. One of the cases in India, pretty famous, was Rana Ayub, who was a journalist covering a lot of these stories against the establishment and would constantly face rape, death threats. All of it might seem like I'm talking about women when I talk about gender, but TFGBV goes beyond misogyny and sexism. It is also rooted in homophobia, transphobia, racism, ableism, and other forms of discrimination. So the next obvious question is, who are the perpetrators? Well, mostly men. Over 72% of the technologically facilitated gender-based violence is perpetrated by men. I want to make the caveat here that it is largely men. A very small subsection of it is perpetrated by women or people from other genders. And the second thing is, even the crimes that are committed against men are largely driven by men. You can think of a lot of these crime units or gangs that tend to run online scams. They're generally composed of men, and their targets largely are men too. So, who are the most common amongst them? The most common are the intimate partners or ex intimate partners largely. So, you would think this is long term relationships, and largely it is, but it also includes people you would meet for a one night stand or a hookup. It is essentially anyone who has access to your personal devices. They tend to use a lot of the technology to stalk, monitor, or threaten the survivors. Even the report, they mentioned that 92.6% of university students interviewed who faced intimate partner violence, which is violence from romantic partners, also faced TFGBV. How do they do that? They essentially stalk people now using spywares, which advertise themselves as a way to catch cheating spouses. So they would upload this in their partner's phone and be able to see where you are. They also monitor your online presence. Then this tends to happen a lot where if your profile is public, even if it's not, there would be someone who would be keeping a tab on each of your movements. It has this sinking feeling that you are being watched. It's the same feeling you would get if someone was talking in your real life. This is called cyberstalking, and I have written an article on it, which I'll link below. But anyways, so there's the monitoring and finally threatening the survivor. This is because I've been talking about online stuff all of this time. You would think that when I say threaten, I am really talking about sending messages or abusing them online through comments. But it gets grave because ex-intimate partners also have access to the bank accounts of their partners. They have access to their social circles, and they use this sort of information to restrict their financial freedom. They also use it to threaten them or gaslight them into not connecting with their networks. The second group are the state actors. This is going back to the Rana Ayub example that I gave, that some of the times, and I'm not claiming here that that was a state actor, but some of the times the perpetrators are institutional. That is, it's not an individual, but a group of people. And one of the most common institutions to do that are the state actors. A large part of this is driven by the innate need of the government to control anti establishment voices. So think of activists, about opposing politicians, people who are putting online content, contesting a lot of the frameworks that are created by the government. The government tend to use large amount of data. They have access to almost all the information on you. And this is the reason why a lot of privacy activists keep fighting against this. In the future videos, I will also get into this tension between tech-facilitated gender-based violence laws and digital safety laws. And government has this unique ability to block you. Most of the times, you'll be blocking the person who's perpetrating it, but governments have the ability to block people who they seem, quote unquote, hampering the peace in the country. So that's state actors. And finally, the group that I thought would be the most prevalent and is not are the strangers and trolls. I love that the report says the harassment in the physical public spaces has moved online. What explains this better than that? Um, what I really like about this report is that it defines trolls. And let me read it out. It is the people who deliberately post comments and messages, upload images or video, and create hashtags for the purpose of annoying, provoking, or inciting women against violence and girls for the purpose of their own amusement. It's perfect. This definition is perfect. So, given all of these definitions and the characteristics, I think the next bit that we'll get into is the characteristics of TFGBV. I'll keep that short because I think I've captured a bit of it in this section. But let's just quickly go through the run list of it. I want you to know that while we constantly keep comparing online violence with offline violence, and it's very easy to get convinced that they are the same thing. Online violence is a beast on of itself. And you would know that if you have spent even a minute online, right? Characteristics of technologically facilitated gender-based violence. So I will keep, like I have until now, keep looking at the list, but let me give you one sentence each on each of them. The first one among the 9 characteristics is anonymity. I have mentioned this before, and one of the unique features of online violence is that people tend to be anonymous. It's very difficult to figure out who is on the other end. This anonymity bit is the pain point between data privacy and online violence because while the anonymity allows people to feel safe in the online spaces, it also allows people to hide behind that garb to harass. And if we allow governments to break that anonymity garb for saving the survivors, it also means that they'll use it to go against the opposing voices or political actors. So, yeah, we have to understand that it's anonymous. The second is action at a distance. So, this is largely the fact that, like it says, people can from other end of the world get to you. This will become very relevant when we talk about the legalese of it all, because the fact that action can take place at a distance, you need to have government bodies working simultaneously across borders and jurisdictions to come together to solve for this issue. The next is accessibility and affordability. This is again, and one of the repeating features of these characteristics is that what makes online this revolution to reckon with is also what makes it horribly difficult to control. Okay, so the next one is, like I mentioned, accessibility and affordability. When has that been an issue, right? We want more people to be accessing more amount of content. We are happy that phones are cheap now and these online spaces are more democratized. But this also means that almost anyone can hamper someone else's existence. Um, the next is propagation. Propagation is the idea that content keeps getting resurfaced again and again. You can push certain content up whenever you feel like. Survivors would tell you how, even though they would delete a lot of the content that has been created, it keeps showing up. So it's unwieldy in a form, right? You cannot just create harm online. You can repost it, reshare, like just spread it across the group and make it go viral. The next is automation. With the advent of technology, it has become not just cost friendly to harass, but it has actually become easy. This is where we should take a break and think about AI, right? Like AI has changed the idea of what automation means. It is, on one hand, the same technology solving cancer research is the same thing that is creating deepfakes at a rate which is abnormal and deeply disturbing. So, yeah, automation is the other feature. Then it's collectivity. It can be collectively organized by a large number of individuals. Again, something which works in favor when you are trying to create movements against an establishment or come together in solidarity for someone, but deeply disturbing when a large part of population gets together on a Reddit thread to figure out how to create deepfakes or nudify women. And the next is normalization, both in the real world and the digital world. We have normalized online violence to an extent. It is deeply sad, but I think, was it in this report or another, it showed that people from the LGBTQ community have increasingly accepted a large part of the violence as par for course. They don't even go report a large part of it because it is seen as something that they have to now accept because they are putting themselves online. And we tend to do the same thing. We look at online violence as a lesser evil and tend to normalize it in the online spaces. And the second last is perpetuity, as images and digital materials used to perpetuate abuse exist indefinitely. Again, coming back to the idea of what stays online remains online forever. And finally, impunity. This is the most disturbing one because impunity essentially means that you can do it without feeling the wrath of the consequences. And this is an outcome of multiple things. It is an outcome of the key characteristics like anonymity and etc. But it is also an outcome of us normalizing it and judicial systems not keeping pace. For instance, California and most other jurisdictions are not creating laws against social media platforms. It took them well about 20 years to come to the conclusion that there has to be some guardrails in the sort of content that is being perpetrated. There are multiple cases of people committing suicides because they did not feel that they were protected in the current social setup against this sort of violence. The impunity has led to multiple victims. I think if there was one thing I would want you to take out of all of these characteristics is the fact that this multiple and repetitive nature of TFGBV means that most victims experience multiple times of abuse at the same time and they face it multiple times. It has important consequences on how women engage politically, socially, economically. And therefore, it's not an issue that we can take lightly. So all of this brings us back to the metric I shared in the beginning. Again, 60% of women with internet access have personally experienced some form of technologically facilitated gender-based violence. That's roughly 3 in 5 women. And just to give you more details on what this metric comes from, it was shared by Center for International Governance and Innovation in 2023. They surveyed 18,000 plus respondents across 18 countries. And being one of the rare studies which focused on Global South, they took data from Latin American countries like Brazil, Chile, Asian countries like China, India, African countries like Kenya and South Africa. And therefore came up with this decisive and a very disturbing metric that I would want you to take back with you, which is 60%, 3 in 5 women face online violence. That's all in today's episode. Thank you for listening it through till now. And if you are interested in exploring more of this, we do write about this topic too. I will link that in the instruction section, but love to know what you think about. And do share what were the key learnings that you found from this, but also your insights from listening to what TFGBV is. Okay, see you around for the next episode. Bye.